My name is Victor Anderson, and until that fateful March evening when my world crumbled beneath my fingertips like broken piano keys, I believed I was living the American dream. For 15 years, I had been building my career as a classical pianist in New York City, gradually climbing from small venues in Brooklyn to prestigious halls in Manhattan. I owned a luxurious apartment overlooking Central Park, drove a silver BMW, and had what I thought was a loving wife who supported every note I played. Rebecca worked as a curator at the Metropolitan Gallery of Contemporary Art in Midtown. She was an elegant woman of 38 with striking auburn hair that caught light like burnished copper and emerald eyes that seemed to hold secrets I never bothered to decode. Our marriage had lasted 12 years, and while we had grown somewhat distant lately, I attributed it to the natural ebb and flow of long relationships. How naive I was. My business manager, Lucas Grayson, had been representing me for 7 years. He was an ambitious man of 45 who dressed in tailored Italian suits and drove a red Porsche that screamed success. Lucas had connections throughout the classical music world, from recording labels to concert halls, from critics to wealthy patrons. He promised to make me a household name, and I believed every word that rolled off his silver tongue. The first crack in my perfect life appeared on a Tuesday evening in March. I was supposed to be at Lincoln Center for a rehearsal with the New York Philharmonic, preparing for an upcoming performance of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. But the conductor, Maestro Heinrich, had fallen ill with food poisoning, and the session was cancelled at the last minute. I decided to surprise Rebecca with dinner from her favorite Italian restaurant on the Upper East Side. As I climbed the marble stairs to our fifth-floor apartment, balancing takeout bags and a bottle of Chianti, I heard the unmistakable sound of Rebecca's laughter echoing through our oak door. But there was another voice accompanying hers, a deep, familiar masculine voice that made my blood run cold. Lucas Grayson was in my home. I pressed my ear against the door, my heart hammering against my ribs like a desperate bird in a cage. The conversation was muffled, but I caught fragments that pierced through me like shards of glass. "When are you finally going to tell him?" Lucas's voice carried a tone I'd never heard before, intimate, possessive. "There's no rush," Rebecca replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Everything is proceeding according to plan." The takeout bags slipped from my trembling hands, crashing to the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the entire building. I stood frozen, waiting for the door to open, waiting for explanations that never came. Instead, I heard hurried whispers and then silence. I couldn't face them. Not yet. Not without understanding what, according to plan, meant. I spent the next 3 hours walking aimlessly through Central Park, my mind racing through every interaction, every glance, every seemingly innocent comment from the past months. By the time I returned home at 9:30, Lucas was gone, and Rebecca was curled up on our white leather sofa with a glass of Merlot, reading Vanity Fair as if nothing had happened. "Hey honey," she said without looking up from her magazine. "How was rehearsal?" "Cancelled," I managed to say, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Maestro got sick." "Oh, that's too bad." "Well, I ordered Chinese. There's some left in the kitchen if you're hungry." "Chinese?" She had ordered Chinese while entertaining another man in our home, then lied about it to my face. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. That night, as Rebecca slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and began to plan. Whatever was happening between my wife and my manager, I needed to know the full extent of it. But more importantly, I needed evidence. The next morning, while Rebecca was at work, I contacted a private security firm called Omega Surveillance. For $5,000, they installed microcameras in our living room, kitchen, and Rebecca's study places where she might feel safe to speak freely. The technician, a thin man named Eddie who smelled like cigarettes and desperation, assured me the cameras were undetectable and could record up to 2 weeks of footage. "Cheating wife?" he asked as he adjusted a tiny lens hidden behind a picture frame. "Something like that," I replied, not yet ready to voice my suspicions aloud. The first week of surveillance yielded nothing unusual. Rebecca came home from work, watched television, made dinner, went to bed. I began to wonder if I had imagined the entire thing, if my paranoia had gotten the better of me. Then came Wednesday of the second week. At exactly 2:15 p.m., while I was at my weekly lesson with Mrs. Chen, my elderly piano teacher in Chinatown, Lucas entered my apartment using a key I never knew he possessed. The footage showed him moving through my home with the confidence of someone who belonged there, checking rooms, making himself comfortable. Rebecca arrived 20 minutes later. What I witnessed next shattered not just my marriage, but my understanding of the two people I had trusted most in the world. They embraced immediately, passionately, like lovers reunited after a long separation. But it was their conversation that truly destroyed me. "Did you check the bank statements?" Lucas asked, settling onto my sofa with a glass of my 20-year-old scotch. "The Chase account now has $2.3 million, Rebecca replied, curling up beside him. "Plus his investment portfolio is worth another $800,000. And the publishing rights to his compositions? That's where it gets interesting." Rebecca pulled out a manila folder from her purse. "I've been researching copyright law. If something were to happen to Victor and we were still married, I'd inherit everything automatically. His original compositions alone are worth at least $500,000. My hands shook as I watched the recording on my laptop screen. These weren't just adulterers, they were calculating, methodical predators who had been studying my finances like scientists examining a specimen. "What about the new will?" Lucas asked, and I nearly choked on my coffee. "I brought it up last week." He seemed receptive to the idea. "I told him it was important for our security." Rebecca made air quotes with her fingers and laughed. "He's such a trusting fool." The conversation continued for another hour, during which they discussed not just my money, but my upcoming concert schedule, my insurance policies, and most chillingly the easiest ways to make my death appear accidental. "A car accident would be cleanest," Lucas suggested. "Or maybe something during one of his out-of-town concerts. Hotel rooms can be dangerous, slippery bathroom floors, faulty electrical systems." "I don't want to think about the details," Rebecca said, but her tone suggested she had already given it considerable thought. "I just want it to look natural." I had to pause the recording. My wife of 12 years, the woman who had shared my bed, my dreams, my secrets, was casually discussing my murder as if she were planning a vacation. But the betrayal ran deeper than I initially understood. Over the next several days, as I reviewed more footage, I discovered that Lucas had been systematically stealing from me for years. He had been inflating expenses, taking larger commissions than agreed, and outright embezzling money from my concert earnings. Using the financial records I kept in my home office, I calculated that Lucas had stolen approximately $400,000 over the past 3 years. Every vacation Rebecca and I had taken, every expensive gift I had given her, every luxury we had enjoyed, it had all been funded partially by my own stolen money. The psychological warfare began to take its toll. During the day, I had to pretend everything was normal. I attended rehearsals, gave lessons, practiced for hours in my soundproof studio. But at night, I would review the surveillance footage, each recording revealing new layers of deception. I learned that their affair had been going on for over 2 years. I discovered that Rebecca had never actually loved me. In one particularly brutal recording, she referred to me as her meal ticket, and joked about how boring I was in bed. I found out that several of my recent concert bookings had been deliberately sabotaged by Lucas to keep me dependent on him. But the most shocking revelation came 3 weeks into my surveillance operation. Rebecca and Lucas had scheduled my death. "The Carnegie Hall concert is perfect," Lucas said during one of their Wednesday meetings. "Victor will be under enormous stress, lots of pressure. If something were to happen afterward, a heart attack, maybe an overdose of his anxiety medication, no one would be surprised." "When is it again?" Rebecca asked, consulting her phone calendar. "May 15th. 2 months from now. That gives us time to get all the legal paperwork in order." May 15th. My most important concert, the performance that was supposed to launch me into the top tier of classical pianists, had been chosen as the date of my execution. I sat in my car outside the apartment building, unable to go inside, unable to face the woman who was planning my murder. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt truly afraid. Not just of death, but of how completely I had misjudged the people closest to me. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to fight back. The next morning, I contacted my attorney, Robert Clark, a sharp-minded lawyer who had handled my contracts for years. Without revealing the full extent of what I knew, I told him I wanted to update my will immediately. "Of course, Victor," Robert said over lunch at the Four Seasons. "Any particular changes you have in mind?" "I want to leave everything to charity," I said. "Specifically to a foundation for young musicians who can't afford classical training." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Everything? What about Rebecca?" "Rebecca will be fine," I said, thinking about the $400,000 she and Lucas planned to enjoy after my death. "She's very resourceful." The new will was completed and notarized within a week. Rebecca knew nothing about it. Next, I began building my case against Lucas. Through careful investigation, I discovered he had been similarly embezzling from other clients. I contacted 3 other musicians he represented and, under the guise of comparing management experiences, learned that they too suspected financial irregularities. I also reached out to Carrie Wilson at Prestige Management, Lucas's biggest competitor. Carrie had been trying to poach me from Lucas for years, and she was more than happy to discuss his questionable business practices over dinner at an expensive steakhouse in Midtown. Lucas Grayson is a snake, Carrie said, cutting into her filet mignon with surgical precision. He's been skimming from clients for years, but no one's ever been able to prove it. Musicians trust their managers implicitly, it's the nature of the relationship. What would it take to prove it? I asked. Carrie smiled. Documentation. Bank records. Recorded conversations. The kind of evidence that could put him away for a very long time. I had all of that and more. But I wanted to do more than just expose Lucas's financial crimes. I wanted to destroy both him and Rebecca so completely that they would never recover. I wanted justice, but I also wanted revenge. The plan that began forming in my mind was audacious, risky, and perfectly suited to my skills as a performer. As May 15th approached, I threw myself into preparing for the Carnegie Hall concert with obsessive dedication. The program was ambitious: Chopin's Ballade No. 1, Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, and the world premiere of my own composition, Memories of Tomorrow, a piece I had been working on for 3 years. Lucas was handling all the logistics, completely unaware that I knew about his plans for after the show. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was working overtime to ensure the success of what he planned to be my final performance. "This is going to be the night that changes everything for you, Victor," he said during one of our planning meetings. "I've got critics from the Times, the Post, the New Yorker. Representatives from Deutsche Grammophon are flying in from Berlin. This concert will make you a star." If only he knew how right he was. 2 weeks before the concert, I made my final preparations. I copied all the surveillance footage onto multiple drives and gave copies to my attorney, my accountant, and Carrie Wilson. I instructed each of them to release the evidence if anything happened to me. I also made a decision that surprised even me. I contacted Detective Maria Santos at the NYPD's Financial Crimes Unit. Using an anonymous tip line, I provided her with detailed information about Lucas's embezzlement activities, including bank records, forged documents, and recorded conversations. "We'll need time to build a case," Detective Santos told me during a secret meeting in a Queens diner. "Financial crimes are complex, and we want to make sure we have airtight evidence." "How much time?" I asked. "Give us until your concert. If everything checks out, we can move that night." Perfect. The evening of May 15th arrived with unseasonable warmth. Spring in New York can be unpredictable, but that night felt almost tropical, as if the weather itself was building toward something dramatic. Carnegie Hall was sold out, 2,804 seats filled with New York's cultural elite, music critics, recording industry executives, and classical music enthusiasts who had paid premium prices to hear what was being billed as my breakthrough performance. I arrived at the venue 4 hours early, ostensibly to practice and prepare, but really to coordinate the final details of my plan with Tommy Rodriguez, the sound engineer I had worked with for years. Tommy owed me several favors, and when I explained that I needed his help to expose some unethical business practices, he agreed without asking too many questions. "You sure about this, Victor?" Tommy asked as we tested the audio system. "Once this goes live, there's no taking it back." "I'm sure," I said, looking out at the empty seats that would soon be filled with witnesses to the most important performance of my life. Rebecca arrived 2 hours before curtain, stunning in a new emerald green evening gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She kissed me on the cheek and wished me luck with what seemed like genuine affection. "I'm so proud of you," she said, straightening my bow tie. "Tonight is going to be magical." She had no idea. Lucas was in full managerial mode, running around backstage, coordinating with ushers, schmoozing with VIPs, and making sure every detail was perfect. He wore a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin and moved with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. At 8 p.m. sharp, I walked onto the stage of Carnegie Hall. The applause was thunderous, washing over me like a warm wave. For a moment, I almost forgot why I was there. The lights, the audience, the magnificent Steinway concert grand, it was everything I had dreamed of since I was a child. I began with the Chopin Ballade, letting the familiar notes carry me into that transcendent state where technical skill meets emotional expression. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every phrase, every dynamic shift. This was what I lived for, the moment when music became more than sound, when it became pure communication between souls. The list was explosive, technically demanding, and crowd-pleasing. By the time I finished, the audience was on its feet, and I could see critics in the front rows scribbling enthusiastic notes. Intermission arrived and Lucas was ecstatic. "Victor, you're playing like a man possessed," he said, pacing excitedly in my dressing room. "The Times critic looks like he's having a religious experience. This is it, this is your moment." "Yes," I agreed, meeting his eyes in the mirror as I adjusted my jacket. "This is definitely my moment." The second half of the program was supposed to begin with my original composition, Memories of Tomorrow. But as I walked back onto the stage and settled at the piano, I gave Tommy a subtle nod. Instead of my composition, the Carnegie Hall sound system filled with a crystal-clear recording of Rebecca and Lucas discussing my planned murder. The effect was instantaneous and electric. The murmur of settling audience members died immediately. 2,000 people sat in stunned silence as my wife's voice echoed through one of the world's most prestigious concert halls. "A car accident would be cleanest," Lucas's voice boomed from the speakers. "Or maybe something during one of his out-of-town concerts." I sat at the piano, my hands resting calmly on the keys, watching the audience's faces transform from confusion to shock to horror. In the front row, I could see Rebecca gripping her seat, her face drained of all color. Somewhere backstage, Lucas was probably scrambling to stop the playback, but Tommy had locked down the sound system. The recording continued for 12 minutes, carefully edited highlights of the most damning conversations. The audience heard discussions of my finances, plans for my death, Rebecca's casual dismissal of our marriage, and Lucas's detailed explanation of how he had been stealing from me. When the final conversation ended, the one where they scheduled my death for this very night, the silence in Carnegie Hall was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop in the last row of the balcony. I stood up from the piano and walked to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice steady and clear. "What you just heard were recordings made in my own home over the past 2 months. My wife, Rebecca Anderson, and my manager, Lucas Grayson, have been planning not only to steal my life's work, but to end my life itself." The audience erupted. Some people gasped, others shouted questions, a few applauded. I could see Rebecca pushing through the crowd toward the exit, but security guards who had been briefed earlier by Detective Santos blocked her path. "I want you all to know," I continued, "that I am very much alive, very much aware of their plans, and very much looking forward to seeing justice served." As if on cue, police officers appeared from the wings and side aisles. Detective Santos herself walked onto the stage, followed by 2 officers in uniform. "Lucas Grayson," Detective Santos announced into the microphone, "you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." The arrest of Lucas backstage was captured by every phone camera in the house. Within hours, the footage would be viewed millions of times across social media platforms. The man who had promised to make me famous had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, just not in the way he had intended. Rebecca was not arrested that night, as planning a murder is different from attempting one, and the evidence against her, while damning, was not as legally solid as the financial crimes Lucas had committed. But her public humiliation was complete and irreversible. The aftermath was swift and merciless. The story dominated news cycles for weeks. Carnegie Hall betrayal, the piano man's revenge, marriage, music, and murder, the headlines wrote themselves. Every major network wanted interviews, every magazine wanted exclusives. Lucas was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for embezzlement and fraud. The attempted murder charges were harder to prove legally, but the financial crimes were ironclad. His management company collapsed within days of his arrest, and his other clients fled to competitors. Rebecca's life imploded even more completely. The Metropolitan Gallery fired her immediately, citing the irreparable damage to the institution's reputation. No other gallery would hire her. Her friends abandoned her. Her family, horrified by the revelations, cut off contact. She tried to fight the divorce, claiming she had been coerced by Lucas, but the recordings spoke for themselves. She received nothing in the settlement, not a penny, not a possession, not even the jewelry I had given her during our marriage. The most unexpected consequence of that night was the transformation of my career. Instead of being seen as a victim, the public embraced me as a hero who had refused to be destroyed by betrayal. The Carnegie Hall recording became legendary in classical music circles, not for the music, but for the drama. Concert bookings flooded in from around the world. Recording contracts arrived daily. My story was optioned for a movie. I was invited to perform at venues I had only dreamed of accessing. Carrie Wilson became my new manager, and within 6 months, I was performing with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. The The irony wasn't lost on me. Rebecca and Lucas's betrayal had catapulted me to exactly the level of fame they had planned to steal from my corpse. A year later, I received a letter from Rebecca. She was living in Phoenix, working as a retail clerk in a department store, and wanted to apologize. She claimed that Lucas had manipulated her, that she had never really wanted me dead, that she was a different person now. I threw the letter away without reading it completely. Some betrayals are too profound for forgiveness. Lucas wrote to me from prison as well, a rambling missive about how sorry he was and how he had been driven by desperation and debt. He asked if I would visit him, if we could somehow repair our relationship. I had that letter framed and hung it in my new apartment, a penthouse overlooking the Hudson River, purchased with the proceeds from my post-scandal success. It serves as a daily reminder of how completely I had misjudged the people I trusted most. These days, I'm more cautious about who I let into my life. I have a new manager, a new accountant, a new attorney, all carefully vetted and all working under transparent contracts with multiple oversight provisions. I date occasionally, but I'm in no hurry to remarry. Trust, once shattered, is not easily rebuilt. Sometimes, late at night in my penthouse studio, I play the piece I never got to perform that evening at Carnegie Hall, Memories of Tomorrow. It's a haunting composition, filled with both regret for what was lost and hope for what might still come. The melody speaks of betrayal transformed into strength, of naivety replaced by wisdom, of a man who discovered that sometimes the greatest performances happen not on stage, but in the moments when we refuse to be victims of other people's cruelty. I am not the same man who climbed those stairs with takeout and wine on that March evening 3 years ago. That Victor was trusting, perhaps to a fault. He believed in the goodness of people he loved. He assumed that marriage vows meant something, that professional relationships were built on mutual respect, that the people closest to him wanted his success rather than his destruction. This Victor, the man I am now, understands that betrayal is not always obvious. It doesn't always announce itself with dramatic confrontations or tearful confessions. Sometimes it wears the face of love, speaks in the language of partnership, and sleeps beside you for 12 years before revealing its true nature. But this Victor also knows something that his younger self did not. Survival is the greatest revenge, and success is the most eloquent response to those who wish you harm. The melody of betrayal has ended. The symphony of my new life plays on. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Maybe YouTube will no longer offer you my channel, so subscribe to it by clicking subscribe on the right under the video to receive new interesting stories. Also on the right of the video there is a playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to, and you can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.